Well, Catherine McGregor joins us from Canberra, and the insights of this lady have captured the imagination of viewers to this program. People look forward to their Wednesday nights. Well, here she is, Catherine. There is a golden rule in politics, isn't it? When you're sick of saying it, the electorate are only starting to hear it. So I come back to this point about the Israeli researcher and author whom you know, an author on military history, Azar Gap. He says, while war might be in decline, China is seeking its expansion through proxy. It's everywhere, Catherine.
Well, that's very true, Alan. He made that point eminently well, that conventional state-on-state warfare has been in relative decline. When it does occur, it's still cataclysmic, as the two great wars of the 20th century showed. But this whole of government full-spectrum operations is a fine art that both Russia and China have really distilled down to an operational art, grey warfare or multi-domain warfare. And this influence peddling that you've referred to in those Pacific nations, they target nations with weak governance structures, and especially since the onset of the COVID pandemic, they've started to become much more active in providing finance and support. Now, one bit of comfort I do draw, Alan, is at this point, Japan, as a well-aligned democratic nation, is still making enormous inroads in Southeast Asia in provision of finance for infrastructure purpose, and is outspending China on worthwhile projects. But we've got to watch this Belt and Road Initiative and the Asia Investment Bank very, very closely, because they are getting these nations into debt up to their eyeballs, and it's shifting their influence in governance institutions like the General Assembly.
Not just about influence, just a quick one from you on these Confucius institutes within our universities. Should we have them?
In a word, no. The Drew Pavlou case speaks eloquently of the threat that they constitute to academic integrity and free speech. That should be enough of a warning for anyone. And I think it's staggering when I talk about Western civilization looking into an abyss. If you want any better example, institutions that turned up their nose at a Ramsay Institute on Western civilization are happy to take this soft money, and it always comes at a price, at a premium from Beijing.
Just let me ask you this. Every year we export to China about $80 billion of iron ore, $15 billion of coal, about $7 billion combined for copper, nickel and bauxite. Now, these key exports would be at risk if China developed relationships with other countries who could replace it. So, for example, if China returned to Indonesia and Russia for coal, or to Indonesia for nickel, or to Guinea for bauxite or whatever, where does this place us? What happens if China temporarily or permanently stopped our coal or barley or wine exports in order to influence foreign policy?
Well, look, we are at risk, as Tony Abbott made clear in that pretty impressive piece he wrote in the Oz yesterday. But there's a number of points to it, Alan. Indonesia is a swing state in this issue. It's the world's largest Muslim nation. Its relationship with China has been troubled, and it has a Chinese minority that was persecuted during the 1965 Sukarno purges. Yet it signed up, or it has lobbied for Belt and Road initiatives. It's got an ambiguous relationship, and yet it feels very threatened by China's intrusions into its exclusive economic zone. In the final analysis, I believe that most of the ASEAN nations, while they are intimidated by China, are actually leaning more to the US camp. Xi has been very, very robust. They've been bullying in the South China Sea. Their conduct there and their bellicosity in the last 6 months has started to make the more wavering nations, I think, tilt a little bit away from them. Well, just counterproductive. But in terms of markets, they will still go where they can get the best price.
Catherine, just on that, you mentioned the South China Seas, and I do want to talk to you about this, but this meeting in Washington, Maurice Payne and Linda Reynolds and so on, I was quite surprised that there's a press release here being issued following that, and they talked about a top-secret defence cooperation framework. I was surprised that there wasn't a specific reference to the South China Seas, and if I could explain why to our viewers. Why is the South China Sea important? And you've checked the map. It's a fair way, a lot of it from China. But the South China Sea, in it there are 11 billion barrels of oil, 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas in deposits under the sea. That's more than exists in the reserves of some of the world's biggest energy exporters. The waters contain lucrative fisheries that account, some say, for more than 10% of the global total. Catherine, no wonder China have got their eyes on the South China Seas and all of it.
Absolutely, and that is absolutely the point. It's resources driven, Alan. There's two issues. They are immensely dependent on Middle Eastern oil at the moment. The United States has virtually removed its dependency on oil originating in the Middle East. People have lost sight of that. 44% of China's oil supplies come through the Straits of Hormuz, which the United States still exerts great leverage over through its 5th US fleet based in the Emirates. That's the choke point that can really trouble China. So I think the resource-rich South China Sea is of enormous interest to them in terms of removing that dependency. But the other thing they've done is buy strategic space, Alan. That's the other thing that they're doing. They're trying to make it difficult for the United States to operate its carrier groups close to Taiwan to support Taiwan. Because in 1996, the US sailed through the Straits of Taiwan with 2 carrier groups and humiliated the PLA, who couldn't even locate them. And ever since that, all of Beijing's grand strategy is about buying strategic space, pushing the US ability to project force further away from the mainland.
Plus, it's our trade route. I mean, this is the key. This is where we're involved here.
Absolutely.
Critical trade route for Australia. That's why I was a bit surprised. The press release didn't seem to make any reference to the South China Seas. I thought that's what they went there to actually have a united position on.
I think what happened is that it was very clear Australia was not willing to undertake independent freedom of navigation exercises, so-called.
On its own.
I think it's clear that there was some pushback. And I think that's prudent enough. I think what we need to do is, as Scott Morrison's alluded to a bit earlier, is bring the Quad on board here. We need the Japanese. They've got a formidable navy, including a very strong submarine capability. India has great leverage in the Bay of Bengal. I think we're prudent not to do freedom of navigation operations on our own, but I do think we should support freedom of...
You're dead right. You're
and
dead
by the
right.
way, incidentally, Alan, we operate in that area as a good international citizen already.
Abiding by
our operations
law.
There in... Absolutely, and they've been impeded by China, who've declared these arbitrary air defence zones. Some of our Orion aircraft, 4 years ago, they were lit up by targeting devices to sort of threaten us when we were engaged in joint counter-piracy and fishing patrolling. So this is a highly fissile area.
Yeah, so just a quick one before you go. Do you see the South China Sea as a test case for whether China becomes the kind of power that works within an international system or against it?
In a short answer, yes, and the jury's already in. They've refused to accept international law, the International Convention of the Sea. The arbitration in 2016 was emphatically against them, and they've laughed that off as having no binding effect on them. But I think Taiwan's the flashpoint, Alan. That's the one that worries me. Their covetousness towards the so-called wayward province, I think, is the trigger point. And what they're doing is buying strategic space.
That's it.
And I think we need to watch vigilantly for a cross-straits operation.
Absolutely.